Ciao, everyone, and welcome back to Growth Talks. I am Raf, your host, and my guest today is Nigel Toon. Hi, Nigel, and thanks for being here. How are you today?
I'm really good, Rob. How are you? Yeah, all good.
Yeah, very good, very good. Super excited about this chart. As I told you, I've read your book a while ago now, and I loved it. And then we had the chance to meet in person here in London. It was a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
So I was really looking forward for this one. So we usually start these conversations here on the podcast with a classic one, with a simple one. So who's Nigel? What's your story? What's your background, and what are you doing now?
So I'm an engineer. Worked most of my life in semiconductors, building microprocessors and related semiconductor technology. Was sort of involved in early days of the internet and some of the underlying technologies that went into that, then in mobile technologies, particularly on the base station side, then move over to the handsets. And since 2012, been working in AI, which is kind of a sort of a repeat in some ways, because when I was at university, I was sort of really interested in AI and all that it might be able to offer. But that was a long time ago when nothing was really possible. So to see the way that it's evolved and developed since is just amazing. I've written a book, as you know. I sit on the board of something called UKRI, which is UK Research Innovation, which is a non-governmental group that funds all of our university research here in the UK, and lots of the innovation stuff through Innovate UK as well. So I've sat on the Prime Minister's Business Council during that really interesting time when they installed a revolving door in number 10 Downing Street, and Prime Minister seemed to change at every meeting. I've invested in a few companies, mainly around the AI space, on a couple of other sort of small company boards, trying to help them to grow. I think investing in AI and which is really the next economic wave here, I think is kind of a really interesting area too. And CEO of Graphcore, which we recently sold to SoftBank. We now have sort of very deep pockets investing in the next generation of AI hardware, but all of that's quite secret, so I can't really go into a lot of details around that.
So we could say that you have been working on this before it was cool, right? I mean, now AI is cool, is the topic of the moment.
We started thinking about AI and what was possible before Ilya Sutskever and Alex Krzyzewski came up with AlexNet, which was probably one of the first deep neural networks that sort of kicked off the whole process. And in Graphcore, we had people like Demis Hassabis as a friends and family investor in the company through the period that they were doing AlphaGo and all of that sort of interesting stuff with reinforcement learning, and then the emergence of large language models. Obviously, Ilya moved over to OpenAI, and Ilya is also a friends and family investor in Graphcore. So we were sort of front row seat seeing all of these large language models emerge. And so it's really been a very privileged position to see a lot of this technology under the hood before it's out in the wild, and other people get to see it. It's like I knew ChatGPT was coming back in the end of 2022, and I was really keen to kind of get in and use it like everybody else. Just stunned by how important that has been and how much it kind of pushed AI into public consciousness in much the same way, interestingly, as AlphaGo did in China. Most people don't realize 240 million people watched that live on television. Lee Sedol losing against the AlphaGo machine, and that really pushed AI into public consciousness in China back in 2016. So it's been really interesting to have that sort of front row seat, seeing AI evolve, and probably also having a sense of what's coming next.
And from this front row seat, so from your privileged position, Why now? I mean, what happened in the last, let's say, I don't know, 10 years that made, these revolution possible, this hype moment possible? Why ChatGPT arrived now? Why we have this technology in these particular moments?
Yeah, again, it's something I cover in the book, and it goes back much longer, Ralph. If you look back to the birth of computing in the 1940s, people like Alan Turing were, enamored by the idea that these machines would somehow, build some form of artificial intelligence. So, this has been on people's consciousness for a while. People have been thinking about this for a long time. There was a big push in the 1960s. The term artificial intelligence was born at a conference at Dartmouth College back in the late 1950s. During the 1980s, there was the whole sort of push around what were called expert systems. The problem is that there wasn't enough information, data. Information is data with context, just to sort of set that little, I always call it information, because it's really the information is what you need. So there wasn't enough information, there wasn't enough computing power to make any of these artificial intelligence systems work. And the other problem is researchers were sort of following this deterministic compute approach. The idea that if I've got all the information and I can follow a simple script, I've got a program and I can come up with answers. And the reality is AI doesn't really work that way. Your brain doesn't work that way. We follow a induction process, as Aristotle would describe it, where we distill the information we have available and we reason with that to come up with possible answers. Most of what we do in our daily life is just guessing. Hopefully they're pretty good guesses, but it's like you meet this person and you think you're going to spend the rest of your life with them. You don't have all the information you need to make that life-changing decision. You don't have a methodology, a process, a program that you go through to work that out. As I guess some people know, that doesn't always work out for people, right? So, we live our life, making these probabilistic judgments, and now we have methods that work on computers that are following the same approaches. And what's really happened is it was the internet, with the discoveries of Claude Shannon going back to, the original information theory that created this digital information, the way to share digital information that allowed the internet, and then mobile networks, and cloud, which, has made all of this information available in a digital form. The methods, most of which actually sort of deep learning methods kind of date back to the 1980s, with the likes of Jeff Hinton and all these researchers who've been recognized, around the methods that allowed us to build these deep learning approaches. But it wasn't until probably 2012 when suddenly researchers started to use GPUs and more powerful processors, and to be able to build this AI and actually make it work. And the point I make in the book is semiconductors. First transistor 1947, the first integrated circuit that packaged together 4 transistors into a single chip, 1960. Today we put 100 billion transistors into a single chip. So 25 billion fold improvement over roughly a 60-year period. If cars had improved by the same amount, we'd all be going everywhere at 200 times the speed of light. So we live in what is a science fiction world made possible by semiconductors. Semiconductors let us go to the moon. They, drive the internet. They mobile phones. All this stuff I used to watch in a science fiction program, like all these communicators. We just have them. It's just part of our everyday life. And semiconductors made that all possible, and that's what's really made AI start to be possible as well.
There are a couple of things that I wanted to ask you. There are, directly from the book. So this is probably the chapter that I love the most. It was chapter number 8. What is intelligence? I loved it. Yeah, I loved it. I loved it. So there is this part here when you start talking about, the meaning of the word intelligence. What do we mean with intelligence? Blah blah blah. And there is a paragraph here when you talk about, you say, I don't need to anthropomorphize their abilities in any way. These are intelligent, self-sufficient animals that are highly evolved. The way we describe intelligence is a human construct that is very much defined by our own human abilities.
Yeah.
So the first one that I want to ask you is this. When we say that now, ChatGPT or, any of these LLM that we use today, we say that they are intelligent and they think. Are they really intelligent? Do they really think somehow? Do we need to, I don't know, just accept the idea that there are different kind of intelligences out there? And,
Yeah, it's
what's your take on this?
It's a great question, isn't it? I kind of named the book "How AI Thinks" as a bit of a double meaning. It's like a provocative title where, don't want to spoil it for people, but I don't believe AI does think in the way that we think. You look at what these large language models do. So on one level, it's absolutely amazing. They have started to understand the structure of language, and to the point that they can understand, decode what you are saying and extract information from what you're saying or from what's written in pages, and they can start to reconstruct that in new forms of writing. Words and language is really just an encoding scheme that we use to transfer information from one person to another. So thoughts in my brain, I convert it into language. Hopefully it's a language that you can understand. You're then able to hear that language and you're able to convert it back into thoughts in your own brain. And the idea that a machine can start to do the same, can start to actually understand this encoding scheme that we use to communicate intelligence between each other is really amazing. Captain Cook, when he went to the South Pacific on his round the world tour, he was given I can't remember who it was, Royal Society or somebody, maybe predates the Royal Society, but one of these scientific groups said to him, please discover whether these people in the South Pacific seas are able to communicate with each other without speaking, and through thought transfer, which is a really weird way to describe it. And what they actually meant was, are they able to write things down and pass written notes to each other and read? That's what he was really being asked. Do they know how to read and write? Or is that a uniquely English thing? Back in the day. So this idea that a machine can now understand this encoding scheme, can read and write in the same way that we do, to start to understand all this written information that we've put down. That's quite amazing. But on the other side of it, what's it actually doing? It's just text prediction. It's just really good text prediction. You give it a prompt and it is working out what is the next best word in a sequence. And from that, building a phrase and then a paragraph and then a story. It's just text prediction, and it goes along and it says, oh, I understand language. At this point, I should insert a quote from somebody famous. And so it inserts a quote from what somebody thinks it famous, but it actually just makes the quote up, and it makes the person up. It hallucinates. It's trying to do the right thing. It's much like a child might do, in understanding that that's what happens in language, but it's just predicting text. And so on one level, it's amazing what it's been able to do, but on another level, it's not really thinking. But the next level is, okay, so if I can start to understand what's written, and I can decode it and extract information from that, okay, maybe now I can start to build an agent that will start to reason. We'll be able to look at enough pieces of information, find connections between different pieces of information, reason to come up with answers to difficult questions. And maybe because it's a machine, it will be able to do that pattern recognition and testing on a much broader set of information than you or I would quickly be able to do. And so we'll be able to help us solve problems that, are currently out of reach for us. So I don't think it thinks in the same way we do. It certainly doesn't, have the emotions and, all the other things that we do. It doesn't have that sort of intuition that you might, based on your understanding of the full world, because it doesn't really know about the world, right? I use the example in the book of Apple. What Apple, when you think of the word Apple, you think of this object that you can hold in your hand that comes from a tree. You know what it's like to bite into it. You know the weight of it. You know the taste of it. You have all this enormous context about this word Apple, or that it might be a computer. AI doesn't know anything about that. All it knows is it's 4 letters, 2 of which are repeated. And it doesn't even really understand that properly either. So, it doesn't have any of that real world context that you have that makes you amazing as a computing device, an intelligent machine. And that's what we are. We're intelligent machines.
And I have a follow-up on that. Do you think that we have kind of reached plateau moment? Let me explain. I think there is part of the discussion now in the AI ecosystem. Someone says that this is what we can get with LLM. I mean, it's not getting better than that because they are just text predictions, as you said. And someone else is thinking that maybe if we push it a little bit more, we can use this text prediction to make them understand the world, understand the context, the ecosystem, the environment, and do something else. And I think a good example of this was the release of O1. For the first time was a product that when I saw it, I said, okay, maybe we can actually do something more with LLM. What do you think about that? Did we reach a plateau, or there is something else that we can do if we push it a little bit more?
Well, so I think some of the things that are going on are using a large language model to look at other pieces of information so that it can then start to piece those together to come up with better predictions. And it looks very much like it's reasoning. The idea that you can, one of the things that's been evolving is this idea of mixture of experts. So GPT-3 to GPT-4. GPT-4 is not one big model. It's actually about 8 models that all work together, and there's a model that has been trained to understand, when these types of questions get asked, I use this piece of the model. When these types of questions, I use that type of the model. And so, it's pulling together experts to try and build a more complete system. And there's that is now evolving. You then start to connect it to other sources of information, so it can go off and it can retrieve and augment its answers based on other pieces of information. And then it starts to then, maybe instead of just coming up with a person and a quote, it actually goes off and retrieves, a real quote from a real person. And so the answers start to look better. And these are all steps that, we're in the middle of. And then you wrap around it what's called an agentic system, where, you pose a question, the agentic system tries to understand the question, plan how it's going to answer, maybe goes off and retrieves information that will help it answer, maybe retrieves specialist forms of models that are going to help it answer that question. Then it uses that to sort of reason and answer, presents those answers to you, and you can sort of see whether, it's giving you a well-reasoned answer. In the middle of all of that, we probably need to build in something called uncertainty quantification, because these systems are making guesses, right? They're probabilistic answers. And so I would quite like to know how probable is this answer, that, how certain are you over the answer that you're proposing to me? The other thing I probably want to do is, if it's a good agent, a bit like, talking to your doctor, you don't expect your doctor just to tell you the answer. You expect to have a conversation with the doctor where you're going to then, explore, well, what do you mean? This rash might be, such and such. And, I've read on the internet, it's, so-and-so. And you want to have a conversation and kind of test the answers that your doctor is giving you. And you want to test the certainty that they have over the answer. So again, a good agent with a good interface to a human is going to be trying to do this. And the challenge we have is, as you try and make these systems larger and larger to be able to answer more and more questions, the risk is that we actually end up heading in slightly the wrong direction.
And what's the right direction? Quick break here. If you are enjoying the podcast and the topics that we cover, I highly recommend you to check out my book, Growth Talks. It's packed with 365 reflections crafted for entrepreneurs, managers, freelancers, content creators, basically a page a day to keep you inspired all year round. And the link's in the description below, of course. Back to the podcast.
Well, so I've got a slight bee in my bonnet at the moment about what people call AGI. First of all, it's a very undefined term, artificial general intelligence, and it sort of implies an AI system that is as clever as a human, is as capable as a human, can answer questions that a human would answer, maybe can perform tasks that humans would perform, and therefore, can be used as a productivity tool, or, used in a number of different ways to improve things. But if you're going to create something that has a general intelligence, that you're going to expect it to answer anything, it's a bit like me going to the cleverest university professor on physics and expecting them to know something about biology or know something about medicine. In my mind, if you've got a general intelligence system, the risk is it ends up being a jack of all trades and a master of none. Mm. The other problem is, how do you test it? The whole point, I live in the semiconductor industry. We build these chips, we send them off to be manufactured. It costs maybe $10 million to manufacture a chip, the first one you build. If it's wrong, that's $10 million you've wasted. So you verify the chip. You find all the ways in which you can test it and verify that it is going to do exactly what you wanted it to do before you send it off and pay the big bucks to have your first chip built. And that is a really rigorous process. We've kind of got used to in software, you just kind of throw it over the wall. Oh, it breaks, somebody will send us a bug report, we'll reproduce it and we'll fix the bug. Nobody died. And people are sort of assuming that you can do the same with AI, but the problem is, if it's general, there's no way you can test it, and you will constantly be finding issues with it because the systems are so complicated that the AI system will never actually be giving you good answers, and you won't actually be able to trust it. So the way you get over that is you say, we're going to constrain the space over which we ask the AI to operate. We're going to try and build an expert in medicine. But rather than just all medicine, we're going to say breast cancer, and we're going to make it an expert in breast cancer detection. And within that field, I can then actually say, well, these are the outcomes that I'm looking for, and therefore I can actually start to test whether it works, and I can mate it up with maybe breast cancer experts all over the world who start using the system, and they feed back into the system to say, this was a good answer, this was a bad answer, and you can use a reinforcement learning scheme to actually cause it to improve over time. So you can actually test it, you can improve it. because it's only trying to be an expert in one particular subject, the model, although it might still be lots of mixture of expert models combining together to come up with good answers about breast cancer, the overall model is going to be much, much smaller. The efficiency of that model is going to be much less, draw less power, use less compute, give you faster responses. And you're going to create AI that is much more useful. And rather than just replacing people, it actually augments people and allows us to come up with answers that we might not be able to come up with on our own. It's like AI is a bit like an engine, right? When engines first came out, we were able to do things that we couldn't on our own because our physical strength just wasn't strong enough. We couldn't dig a big hole. We couldn't move a mountain to, put a city there. I was go to Boston sometimes, and I'd look at the Back Bay. Most of that was, they had a big mountain and they used machines to collapse most of that mountain and fill in the Back Bay to create a big part of Boston. And it was basically early steam engines that allowed them to do that. It wasn't, human muscle. And now we're at the stage where AI comes along, and rather than it just, helping us to move mountains or fly, it's actually improving our intelligence. It can improve our intelligence and allow us to solve problems that, currently are out of reach. And that is the application for AI that we really need to focus on. So I sort of say, AGI is probably nonsense. And what we really want is artificial expert intelligence. Let's call it AEI. And we need lots of different AIs. The more expert, the more focused they are, the better they have the chance of being. And yes, you can combine a bunch of them together to come up with, quite a broad set of answers. But at no point is it ever a general intelligence. That just seems to be the wrong direction for us to head in.
So let me get this straight. You don't think it's a good idea, but do you think it's possible, or both? So it's not a good idea, it's not even possible.
If you, over time, if you end up with lots of experts and you have a way of understanding, triaging the questions to know which experts are going to answer the specific question, then, you'll have something which is, quite generally intelligent. And if that all sort of sits in one place somehow through an interface, then, maybe that helps you do lots of things. But the reality is it's made up of lots of independent AI systems, each of which is an expert in its own specific area. And the reality is will probably get used by experts in that space to make their answers better.
Yep. Let me get another one from the book. By the way, the link is going to be in the description, guys. So how AI thinks is going to be linked in the description. So, yeah, another one that I loved was the chapter number 16. So the challenges of AI. And there is this paragraph here called framework. We will need to establish regulatory frameworks that help to provide appropriate guidelines and controls. Do you think that's actually possible?
It's really
in terms of speed. This is going very, very fast.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. It's probably the area of the book that I felt most challenged over, because everyone wants a black and white answer. And regulations around AI are actually really, really difficult. So Ralph, I might look at you and say, wow, I'm gonna take your podcast and I'm gonna make a deep fake of you, and I'm gonna reproduce your voice and I'm gonna reproduce you. As far as I'm concerned, that one's pretty black and white. Without your permission, my view is that should just be illegal. By the way, it's not today, which is kind of a failing. But that, to me, that's pretty black and white. But let's say I'm inspired by you because you're a very inspirational person. Where does inspiration start to turn into replication? And, we've seen this with, music artists, where people come along and claim, oh, you stole my riff and you stole my song. maybe they were inspired by something, or maybe both artists were inspired by something, and it ends up being similar. But is that replication or is it inspiration? And that is a gray area, which is really, really difficult to regulate around. So until we've got some good case study around that, it's going to be very, very hard. And the reality is, it's going to come down to our values, our backgrounds, to think about what is appropriate. I traveled to China, probably the safest place in the world. There's no crime on the streets in China because there's cameras everywhere and they're recognizing the faces, and so people don't do crime in the street. But where do you cross the line to become a person of interest in that environment? What are you culturally happy having in that environment? And so these things are really difficult. I think perhaps the people who are doing it best at the moment is maybe Singapore. Singapore is creating guidelines, and then they're trying to work with the industry to say, are these guidelines correct? How do we modify them? How do we improve them? And can we eventually turn these into regulations that are universal and will actually work for us? You go to Europe and they're sort of going the other direction, where they've come up with a whole bunch of potential laws which they're going to enact. And the reality is, what we're going to end up with is these innovators who are going to be on the front end of that, where suddenly they're going to, somebody's going to say, oh, you've crossed the line. And they're going to have to work out, okay, how do we back off from this? How have we crossed the line? A whole bunch of case law precedent is going to end up being created. Unfortunately, it's probably not going to be by the big tech companies who will just say, oh, it's our platform, but we're not responsible for the end application. It's going to be some small, innovative European company that gets caught in the crossfires on that, trying to come up with a useful application, which somebody points at and says, oh no, you crossed the line, you didn't protect people, or you didn't protect their data, or whatever infringement. And then we're going to end up with a whole bunch of case law having to be developed to actually work out what really are the lines on these laws. It's going to be difficult, I think, to put this stuff in place. The reality is, it's not the AI. My big point is, it's not the machine. Don't blame the machine. It's the people. It's the people who use the machine. It's the people who develop the machine. That's where the issue is. It's like the UN since 2012 has been trying to work on regulation that would stop AI autonomously deciding to push the button to kill someone. As far as I'm concerned, that's one of those black and white ones that just makes perfect sense. We should outlaw it, shouldn't be allowed. 2 countries have blocked that: Russia and America. Why is it a good idea that we have weapons that are going to decide whether you or I should be killed? The reality is, as Alan Turing says, if it's going to be intelligent, it's going to make mistakes. So don't we want a human in the loop on that to be able to hold them accountable? And you can't say, like, was it Air Canada and their chatbot that gave away free flights, who claimed, oh, it's not us, it was the chatbot who gave away the free flights. No. You gave away the free flights. Your tool, you're responsible. Somebody has to be responsible.
Yeah. I'm thinking a lot about this topic. I remember reading the AI Act, the EU developed a few months back. And then last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, there was the memo from the US government. And every time I, read this kind of document, what I feel is that it's always very difficult to find a balance between, the regulation on one side and the innovation on the other. I think that we need, something on that point of view, but it's really hard to do it without, blocking the companies, the researchers, the innovators out there. How do we find this balance, if there is a way to find it?
Yeah, I think it's hard, isn't it? But what you've somehow got to focus on is what harm is being done to people. And that's really where, we do need to take responsibility, and businesses need to take responsibility. If your facial detection system that maybe is being used to process visas and paperwork to be able to cross a border, if that doesn't recognize people of color, for example, properly, and pushes them to the back of the queue, that there's a bias in the system. And it's not the AI that's biased, it's the fact that it's been trained badly, it's been implemented badly, it's the people who put that system into service that are to blame. But if somebody's being held back because of an AI system, maybe loan applications that looks at where you live, and is making judgments about you, that have been built into the system, then those are areas which we've really got to look at and say, oh, this is wrong. And who are the people best placed to do that? Well, of course, the people who are putting those systems into service, but also the people who are developing those systems. It's a bit like a doctor. We trust doctors to look after us. We don't expect doctors to experiment on us. They take a Hippocratic oath where, do no harm. You don't experiment on your patients. You don't try stuff out on your patients to see whether it's going to work or not. You try and use your expertise to minimize harm. And so maybe with the developers of these systems, we need to have more ethics in computer science courses and AI courses, so the experts who actually understand them and are building these systems actually take a step back and say, okay, I'm really concerned about how this thing is going to be used. And then we end up in a whole debate around regulation and control, but more to do with more and more, we're seeing situations where even at a country level, they can't afford to be in this AI race. And they're becoming dependent upon the US or China for this technology. And so you end up with sort of degree of colonization, technology colonization, which potentially is going to go on as well. And that's probably at the root of the whole battle between America and China at the moment, where America's trying to limit China's access to some of this technology so that it is in the driving seat of this and it has control, over what's going on. So I think we're very much at one of those moments where, do we want 8 billionaires to get richer, or do we want 8 billion people to get richer? And I think that is something we've really got to think quite hard about, as AI continues to roll forward from here.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. Nigel, from your perspective and from your privileged position, what do you think is going to happen in the next couple of days, next couple of years? So we are at the end of 2024. What are the main trends that we should expect for 25 and 26? What's going to happen in the AI world?
Yeah, well, stealing this from other people, it's like the AI you use today is by far the worst AI you're ever going to use. And that's pretty clear. Ray Amara talks about this idea that we tend to overestimate in the short term and underestimate the impact in the long term. And I think that's very true. There's a sort of a level of expectation around AI in the short term, which is probably going to be missed. Actually, there's lots of companies racing to think, how can I apply AI in my business? And in some cases, it's perhaps too early for them to do it, or they're going to use systems that aren't actually very useful, and people will go, yeah, that didn't really work very well. But then the risk is that they miss how it might completely change their industry. I think a great example is electricity. Electricity is probably the biggest economic impact, bigger than steam engines. And the thing that made the difference was not light bulbs, which is what electricity was originally rolled out to do, to remove these smelly gas lights. It was actually electric engines. And the fact that an electric engine could be put next to a machine, and you could then put the machine anywhere in the factory that it needed to go, so you could then lay out the factory to match the manufacturing process, and then with replaceable parts you got mass production, and from mass production we got our consumer society, and that period created the most economic wealth of any period of time, because people completely changed the way the process works. They didn't just automate, in the way they did in the first phase of the Industrial Revolution. They just automated the machines, the weaving machines, and replaced the humans to get a productivity boost, which pushed the economic outcome, the economic value, into the owners of the machines, into the owners of the mills, and away from the workers, who became Luddites. And it's kind of frowned upon as a word now, isn't it? It's kind of seen as a bad thing. But actually what they were just arguing for was, we want to get some economic value from what's going on here. This second wave of the Industrial Revolution with electricity created much fairer distribution of income. And it was interesting. You go from the point at the Wall Street crash, around about 26% of all the world's wealth was in the hands of 1% of the people, the top 1%. By 1960, it was down to, I think, I can remember the numbers exactly off the top of my head, around about half that amount was in the hands of the 1%. It had been distributed much more fairly across people through, through the consumer society that sort of built up, which almost seems counterintuitive in some ways. But wages got better, there were better jobs generally everywhere, wages went up, and more wealth was distributed. Stayed about the same till about 1980, and since 1980 it's been going in the other direction. IT computers have been used primarily to automate parts of people's jobs, reduce, take people out of the system. It hasn't changed necessarily how people do their jobs or how the industries work. And as a result, we're now back to 26% in the hands of the top 1%. So, is AI going to make that worse, or is it going to be like electricity, where it allows us to completely reshape how we do things, and end up in a much fairer place? I travel a lot, and I go to an airport, and it just frustrates me that, there's a machine, you got to check yourself in, you got to tag your own bag and put it on the belt, and the machine never works, and there's poor operators then, having to come over and help you. They've been automated out of a job, like at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Why can't I walk into the airport with a tag, like an air tag type thing in my bag? The airport knows I've arrived. I just put my bag on the conveyor belt, I go off and do my shopping. The person in the shop points out, "Oh, Mr. Toon, your flight's just about to leave. Isn't it time you went to the gate?" And the whole thing, you could change completely the way the process works, rather than automating the current process. And people would have, in that environment, people would have much better jobs, people would have, much better experiences. So we've got to think about how AI can completely change the way that we do things, to create a fairer environment. So I think that's a big responsibility. And it's kind of why, in some ways, it's sort of why I wrote the book, to help everybody understand more about AI, so they can potentially have some agency to think about, okay, how's this stuff going to be used? How's it going to affect me?
The thing that you just described is more a change of mindset, I would say, before, that technological change.
Yeah.
It's somehow the way we see the technology applied in our world that has to change, right?
Yeah, and we're sort of facing a couple of really big transitions here, right? We're now at the phase where, certainly in the Western countries, our populations are actually declining. People are aging, and our birth rates are going down, and that's something we've never seen before. There's no precedent for that. So what are the economic impacts of that? How do we adjust to that new reality? The second thing is, we're throwing all this carbon into the air, and we've got to stop. You can't just, okay, well, let's not do any more than we're currently doing. No. This stuff takes thousands of years to secrete into oceans, and it hangs around in the atmosphere for thousands of years. So we've got to stop throwing it up there. We've got to literally stop. And that's a massive, massive change that is going to need technology to help us do that. And then we've got AI coming along that, equally is like engines that made us stronger. AI is going to make us cleverer. So let's make sure that everybody gets clever. Let's make sure that everybody's life improves as a result. We don't just put this extra intelligence into the hands of a few that ends up meaning that, your job is replaced by somebody who knows more about AI than you.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. Nigel, we usually end these conversations here on the podcast with, two quick questions. So the first one is, do you have any books that you want to share with my audience? It can be AI related or not. So feel free to share everything that is nice or cool or important to read.
Yeah, well, the one I read recently, which was really informative, was after Henry Kissinger died, his book about the opening up of America-China relationships. And, really, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that I didn't know and didn't understand. And I found it, really interesting, especially, in a world where we seem to be going in the other direction, where America and China seem to be going further and further apart, and that is the potential cause of massive conflict in the future. So I've found that an amazing book from an amazing person who I once sat next to on an aeroplane in Europe, and it was just by pure chance. And what an inspirational person, and that's an amazing book that I would highly recommend. What was the other question?
The other one is, do you have any tools that you love and you want to share with us? We are a very nerdy community, so any tools that you use, day-to-day job?
My analog watch, I'm kind of a tech Luddite from that point of view. I like stuff that's mechanical things. I like old cars and mechanical watches and things that you can get in and play with. So I actually like to be able to control things. Maybe that's the engineer in me. I like to be able to control it.
I like it. Nigel, any links that you want to share with us before saying bye, where they can read you, reach you, follow you?
Yeah, I tend to put some stuff out on LinkedIn occasionally. So, on my LinkedIn posts, I do have a website, but, struggle to keep it up to date. I must find a better way of doing that, invest more time in it. So hopefully some exciting things over the next year or so. So yeah, it'd be great to keep people up to date and see what comes next. I think this AI is going to change a lot. For you and I, I'm sure we'll be doing very different things in a year's time.
Yeah. I'll leave every links in the description below. Nigel, thank you very much for your time. This was great. I loved it.
Thanks, Ralph. Cheers.
If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe to the channel on YouTube and to follow me on Spotify so you don't miss any future episode. And thanks for tuning in. See you soon.